Let's go ahead and preview some of the new features inside of Luminar AI. Now, at first glance, it looks fairly similar to Luminar 4, so if you are familiar with that version, then this will not be a huge drastic transition. There are obviously some updated and advanced AI features that were added to this, along with some shifts and changes within the app itself. But it should be a really smooth upgrade if you're accustomed to Luminar 4. One big change to this version is the transition from looks to templates. Now, looks in the previous version of Luminar are basically presets, and you could click on them to apply them. Templates are very similar. You can think of them as looks, you can think of them as presets, but it uses AI to help you find a template that might be best suited for your photograph. I have this photo selected. I'm going to go ahead and click Templates at the top. Now on the right, if you go to the For This Photo section, you can see some of those template packs that are kind of recommended for the photo that I have in front of me. Now you can always go down and select other options. There are many different categories to choose from. But if I were to switch to a different photo, check out that section on the right. That's going to change based on the image I have selected. So here I selected a flamingo image, and it's recommending an Animal Friends pack, some nature, and also objects. On the right, by default, it will go to that template section. But if you click on My Collection, you can actually add favorites. This is where your purchased and downloaded templates will end up. There's a section for user templates when you save your own templates within the app. And then legacy templates are for looks that have been migrated over to Luminar AI. So I'll go back up to templates. I'll choose that first image I had selected previously. I'll click on that first experimental collection. And as I click through them, it's going to apply those settings, and I can see them instantaneously on my photo. Templates are not meant to be full edits to your image. They're a good starting place. So I've added this template. Now I can go up to Edit and refine this look. When I look at those tools on the right, those little dots next to both the tools as well as the categories are going to give me an indication of where the edits have been placed. So for example, I know that Enhance AI was added to this image. I can toggle it off and on to see how it changed. I can also further edit this template and these settings to my own liking. For example, I might want to go down to that color section and try using that Remove Color Cast to see if it helps with the image. Or maybe I want to go into the Creative section. I might want to add a little bit more stylizing here. Maybe go up to the Matte tool. And once you get to a point where you're finished with the image, you can save this template as a new template so you can apply it to other photos. And you can do that in the bottom right corner and select Save. Now if I go back over to Templates, I can go over to the My Collection section, expand User Templates, and I can rename this if I'd like to make it something that works a little bit more with my photograph. One of the new tools in Luminar AI is the Composition AI tool. With this image, I'm going to start out by using the perspective buttons. This will help to correct the distortion vertically and horizontally. And I can also click the Composition AI button, which will give me a recommended crop. And this crop looks pretty good for this photo. I might want to make a few changes. Maybe I want to drag it down from the top, but it gives me a really good starting point. Just like with most cropping tools, you also have the ability to choose the crop yourself. You can select the ratio from this dropdown, and you can also switch it from vertical to horizontal or vice versa using the Rotate Crop button. Down here, we have those Rotate and Flip buttons, and you can also further enhance the 3D image transform, which will manually correct that distortion. If you'd like to preview your crop image, toggle that tool at the top. And now I can use my before and after to preview my image. I've also made a few other adjustments to this photo to correct for the tone, but you can see how that crop with the Composition AI tool did a really good job of improving that composition. Here I have a photo of some mushrooms, and I've already made a few adjustments to this, primarily to get rid of that color cast. So what I've done so far is I made some adjustments to the white balance using that light tool. I also went into color and I used that remove color cast, which did a really good job of bringing the original color back. Over in the professional tab, I used color harmony to kind of enhance some of the color and add some contrast there with the color contrast section. And I even added a touch of mystical. But what I would like to do here to continue this edit is to add some separation between the mushrooms here in the foreground and the background. So I'm going to use Atmosphere AI. Atmosphere AI is located in the Creative tab. I'll click on it and I'll begin the edit just by increasing that amount slider. If I increase it all the way to the right, you can really see what it's doing. It's masking the background from the foreground and adding a nice fog, kind of a haze to the background. There are 4 different settings. We have fog, layered fog, and the layered fog isn't really going to show up here because most of the masked area is on the top. If I had a wider landscape scene, you'd likely see some type of a fog kind of in the lower third to the middle part of the image. Mist is a slightly less intense version of fog. And then there's also haze, which is kind of similar to that layered fog, so you're not going to see it in this example. So let me jump back to fog, and then I'll go to mist so you can see the difference between those two. And mist has a little bit more of a softened look to it, so I'm going to stick with that. The depth slider will allow you to bring that fog closer to the front or move it further to the back. The default is set to 20. I'm going to increase this to bring it a little bit closer to the front. You can also decrease the lightness to make the fog a little bit darker. And now that I have most of those settings where I like, I'm going to go back up to the amount slider and move it to the left. And let me kind of find a good spot at around 30 or so. Let me toggle this off and on. And that's just adding a nice haze effect to the photo. I could increase that even a little bit more and maybe even decrease that depth. Let me toggle that off and on. And it was just a really fast way to add a nice amount of atmosphere to my image. One of the new features to Luminar AI is the AI portrait tools. This photo has 2 faces in it. Let's go up to Face AI, and I'll begin by increasing the face light. This helps to add kind of a subtle spotlight to the face, so it stands out a little bit more in the photograph. If I toggle this off and on, you can see it's adding that face light to both of those faces. There's also the option to slim the face. I'll go ahead and just move that back and forth so you can see how that works. Now if I go into the eyes section, you'll notice that Lily on the right, her eyes are visible, whereas Ashlyn is smiling and laughing, so her eyes are a little bit squinted. I'll begin by playing around with the iris. With this dropdown, you can actually change the color of the eyes. I'll go ahead and change the eyes to blue, and you'll notice that on Lily on the right, her eyes have changed, but Ashlyn's eyes are not visible, so the iris is not going to be affected. I'm going to change that back to original. So for the most part, a lot of the things here are only going to affect Lily's eyes. Let me go ahead and zoom in so you can see those changes a little more clearly. The iris flare slider will help add a nice touch of brightness to the eyes. I do have some catch lights in her eyes already, but this slider does a good job of making them a little bit brighter. You can also use the enlarge eyes slider. Probably don't want to go too far with this, but it helps when somebody is maybe squinting their eyes a bit, so you can help them kind of stand out a little bit more. Eye whitening will help whiten those white parts of the eyes. And eye enhancer does a good job of just enhancing the entire eye area itself. If you have a photo with red eye, the red eye removal will be very helpful with that. You can also use the dark circles removal to help lighten underneath those eyes. And improve eyebrows will just darken the eyebrows. I'll go ahead and back out so we can see what they look like together. And I'm going to toggle this off and on. And if you watch both faces, there are some changes being made to both of those faces in the photo. Next, I'll go down to the mouth section. I typically increase the lip saturation, redness, and darkening all at about 25 to 30. For teeth whitening, only Ashlyn's teeth are visible, so this is only going to affect Ashlyn's face. Let's go ahead and toggle this off and on. And with only a few adjustments, I'm able to make their faces really stand out. Skin AI is another new tool inside of Luminar AI. I'll zoom into Lily's face so we can see it a little bit more clearly. I like to start by checking the skin defects removal. There are not very many blemishes here, so there wasn't a big change. I typically toggle this off if there are no major blemishes to remove. But I do like to play with the amount slider as well as shine removal. These do a good job of both smoothing the face, but still keeping the texture intact. So her face is not just a big blur. And I'll toggle that off and on so you can see that change of only that tool. Body AI is also another new tool inside of the Portrait tab. If you take the shape slider, you can move it to the left to add bulk, or you can move it to the right to slim the body. I can go pretty extreme with this photo because it's an alien, so it's kind of fun to make the proportions look a little off. This is a good tool to help remove some of the bulk, maybe from some loose fabric. I'll scale it back just a bit. And the abdomen slider will kind of help tuck in the stomach area. So if I move it all the way to the right, it just pinches that in. Typically, I won't want to go extremely high with this. If I toggle this off and on, you can really see those results in the photo. One thing that has changed in Luminar AI versus the previous versions is that Luminar now no longer has layers. You can still mask the tools. So if I were to click on a tool, you can see that many of them have the mask icon here. So if you click this, you get these options to actually mask that tool. If you would like to do some selective edits to a photo outside of the tools here inside of the Essentials, Creative, Portrait, and Professional tabs, you'll want to go down to the Local Masking section. By clicking Add, you have two options, Basic and Texture. Let's start with Basic. As soon as I add a basic local mask to my photo, I have the option to mask the photo right off the bat. And if I hover over the image, I can see that I now have a brush and it's set to a paint mode. But I can also go straight to those settings and start playing with the settings. So in this case, I'd like to make that rose stand out a little bit more. I'm going to increase the AI structure on it. I'll decrease the highlights and maybe even decrease that exposure just a touch. As I'm watching the photo, I notice that all of those settings affected the entire image. But I can easily go over to the image and brush over that flower, and all of those adjustments I just set are now only going to be applied to wherever I've masked my image. So if I toggle this off and on, and if you watch that flower, it's going to show those edits that I added. Inside of the Local Masking tab, you can stack different adjustments. So I could add another basic if I'd like to, but in this case, I'm going to add a texture. I'll go straight down to the Load Texture option. I'll double-click one of my snow overlays. By default, the texture is added as a standard image file at 50% opacity. I like to blend my overlays, so I'm going to increase that opacity up to 100%, click Advanced Settings, and then change my blend mode down to Screen. Now if I toggle this off and on, I have some nice snow falling in the background. And because this is in the local masking section, it's easy for me to brush out areas I don't want this to be applied to. So let's say I'd like to keep the flower from showing any of those snowflakes. The brush is set to a paint in mode, so I'll press X, which converts it to erase, and you can see that toggle just below the paint mask section. Now if I brush over that flower, it's going to make sure that none of those snowflakes are falling in front of the flower. Because there are no layers now inside of Luminar AI, the Erase tool is much easier to use because it's not going to create a new layer each time you want to use it. I'll go ahead and access Erase in the Essentials tab. And I'm going to zoom in to an area I'd like to fix. I'll increase my brush radius with that right bracket key. I prefer to keep the brush radius size just a little bit larger than the thing that I want to erase. It's a good way to make sure that only the parts that I want to erase are contained within that edit. Then I simply brush over, and you don't have to do it all in one brush stroke. You can lift up and reposition, and then brush again. Then I'll go back to the Erase tool and click Erase. If you're not happy with how it worked, you can always go back and maybe do some adjustments and click Erase again. And because there are no layers to have to deal with, it makes it a lot easier to use this tool. I hope this video was useful to you in learning some of the new features in Luminar AI. And if you'd like to learn more about Luminar, go to nicolesy.me/Luminar.